Being in debt isn't a scary thing because it actually offers us more options, more freedom down the line. This one is a really good comparison, will help you kind of open your eyes up to getting into debt, building that wealth base and it not being so scary. Financially free comes with getting into debt. I'm focusing on good debt. You're purchasing property, performing assets that are going to grow in value over time and they're going to pay you income. The debt is your friend. Good debt is your friend. And that the leverage part of it is so important, right? Inflation devalues debt. And that's why the government can get into so much debt as well and be in a deficit, because in 10, 15, 20 years time, it's going to serve you extremely well. Your debt's going to be devalued due to inflation. Your rental income's going to increase over time and create that larger passive income. So it is really shifting that mindset, understanding that debt-free isn't the be-all and end-all, and that financially free is what you want to focus on. And we are back with another episode of the Tailored Property Wealth Podcast. My name is Casey Taylor. I'm the host of the podcast. And today, in this episode, we're talking about debt-free versus financially free. And this one is a really good comparison and will help you kind of open your eyes up to getting into debt, building that wealth base and it not being so scary. A lot of people out there, and what we are conditioned as a society to do is to go out there, get in debt for 30 years, pay off our owner-occupied property, and then that's kind of it. I've managed to build a multi-million-dollar property portfolio in just a few short years, and I want to inspire and motivate other Australians that if I can do it, so can you. The Tailored Property Wealth Podcast has been created to help educate, mentor, coach, and support you through everything relating to property investing to make sure you go out there and make a much better educated decision when investing in property. Please like, share, subscribe, and share this podcast with anyone who you think might see value in it. So what I see when I talk to people a lot is they're getting into this mentality of I've just got to pay down the debt on my owner-occupied property and then I'm doing well. Which, don't get me wrong, paying down that debt is awesome. However, if you can go out there and actually leverage the equity in your owner-occupied property into investment properties elsewhere, diversifying and building that larger wealth base, you're actually going to be a lot better off financially, even though you're holding more debt than what you would be if you were just owning your owner-occupied property. And I guess what we're going to touch on today is some of those factors over time and what that really means for you financially. All right, so we'll get straight into the episode today and kind of just go through what that debt-free scenario looks like, holding your owner-occupied property and what that looks like in retirement. And then we'll compare it to what it can look like when we are financially free, but we are holding debt because we have investment properties and we've had that diversification piece, etc. Okay. Alrighty, so like I mentioned, we are conditioned as a society to go out there. We leave school. I've touched on this a little bit before. We leave school, we go out there. We typically going to get a personal loan, or sometimes we can get the credit card or whatever it is for whatever reason. And then we start to get used to paying off debt because we've got something up front, that instant gratification. And then progressively over time, that moves towards saving a deposit, purchase an owner-occupied property, and then get a loan for 30 years, and we're paying that off for 30 years. And that asset, if we only purchase that owner-occupied property and nothing else, into retirement, we still rely on the pension because that owner-occupied property is not paying us money in the pocket. And if we then want to, I guess, access some of those funds from that property being the largest asset that we own, we either one, need to downgrade that property to get some liquidation going, or number two, we need to move potentially to an area that is more affordable. So prime example would be if you're in Sydney, you got a 2 mil house, you could move out regional, buy something for half the price, and then you have some cash left over. So I guess if you're someone who you've built a family, you've built this life in a town, and then you have to upend and go somewhere else just to get liquid cash, that's probably not going to serve you too well, especially if you've got kids or you've got grandchildren at that point in time. It's it's leaving you kind of in a little bit of a position where you don't have as many choices, even though you are debt free and you could have paid that off a long time ago. So it's just something that we've got to get used to, that being in debt isn't a scary thing because it actually offers us more options, more freedom down the line. So when you're out there, it's great to pay off your owner occupied property, but just don't get caught up that that is the be all and end all. If you are focusing on paying some of that debt down, you're building up equity. And if that property grows in value, you've then got available equity in that property that you can go out and access. You can turn that debt into a tax deductible debt because you're purchasing a rental property. And then what you're able to do is have options into retirement where you could sell that property or whatever, which we'll get into. So don't get caught into that trap of just focusing on being debt free. So many people do it. Sometimes I have clients or prospects coming on, and what they need to do is they say, look, I need to go speak to my parents about what to do. And they actually take advice from them, but their parents only own their owner occupied property. So they don't go out there and get that investment property that's going to really perform and change their future. So it is really shifting that mindset, understanding that debt-free isn't the be-all and end-all, and that financially free is what you want to focus on. And financially free comes with getting into debt. And I don't mean bad debt, personal loans, credit cards, car loans, all that sort of thing. I'm focusing on good debt. You're going out there, you're purchasing property, performing assets that are going to grow in value over time, and they're going to pay you income. So if you can shift your mindset and understand that the most debt that you can get in and leverage those high performing assets, you're actually going to be far better off long term. And in a 15-year period, you might be in millions of dollars worth of debt versus not having any debt at all, but you're getting passive income and you have this little nest egg and options in the future. So understand that debt is your friend. Good debt is your friend. And that leveraging, the leverage part of it is so, so important, right? So you want to go out there, you want to show the banks that you can service the debt, purchase that property, and you just got to let time do its thing. Some people say, look, I've left it too late. I'm 50, I'm 55, whatever that looks like. If you're 50, you can still hold a property for a 15-year period, and at 65, that property is most likely going to have doubled in value, assuming a 5% growth rate. We get far above that 5%, but always look conservatively, right? So if you can be aggressive at 50 years old and get a couple of properties and let them double in value over a 15-year period, that's going to serve you really well. Now, if you're in your early 20s, if you're in your early 30s, imagine what that's going to do over a 30, 40-year period. Or a little bit shorter period and you retire a lot sooner than what you could have if you're just focusing on paying that owner-occupied debt off over 30 years. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Tailored Property Wealth Podcast. I hope you're learning lots and getting lots of value out of this episode. If you want to discuss the opportunity of working with us here at Tailored Property Wealth, jump across to the website www.tailoredpropertywealth.com.au, complete the contact form, let us know that you're listening to the Tailored Property Wealth Podcast, and let's reach out, let's have a chat and see how we can help you execute on your property goals. So if we go out there, we leverage either cash that we've got as down payment, deposit, and then we're using the bank's money to purchase a property. We are building a larger wealth base than what we could have if we're just focusing on paying down that debt with an owner-occupied property. So instead of having potentially $1 million asset, now you might be able to get a $2 or $3 million asset base. You've got a debt attached to that, yes, but we'll get to that in a moment as to what that looks like over time. But that compound effect, if we're assuming the same growth rate of 5% and it doubles in a 15-year period, instead of that $1 million doubling to 2 million, it might be 2 to 3 million doubling to 4 to 6 million in a 15-year period. So all of a sudden, our asset base is so much bigger. And then there's a couple of factors that I'll go through now as to what happens with that debt. Now, the first one to remember is that inflation, which is a hot topic at the moment, inflation actually devalues debt over time. So if we have $1 million worth of debt today and we don't pay $1 of that debt off, but in 15 years' time, we've held it interest only, that $1 million is actually worth a lot less in a 15-year period of time to what it is today, even though that dollar amount hasn't changed at all. So you have to understand that inflation devalues debt. And that's why the government can get into so much debt as well and be in a deficit, because what happens over time, that inflation actually devalues the debt. So if you can look at that from the government point of view and understand that, as an investor, it serves you extremely, extremely well. Now, what happens over time when we purchase properties, and for example, we're kind of targeting 5.5 to 5% roughly in gross yield. It has dropped a little bit because property prices have increased. But we secure a property at, let's say, 5% gross rental yield. But every single year, if we're following the right metrics, we're following rental income growth, we're following vacancy rates and understand there's a supply shortage, that rental income is going to grow over time. So if you're generating $500 a week today, in 12 months' time, it might be $540, $550. And then in 2 years' time, it might be $600. And progressively over time, that increases. So what you're getting paid in the pocket increases. However, remember that we're holding that debt. We're not paying that debt down. So the repayments on that are staying the same, worst case scenario, but our rental income is greater. So over time, we're going to be getting a passive income coming in. Now, that might be $1,000 the first year, if any, but over time, progressively, that'll increase. It might be $10,000 a year, $20,000, and so on and so forth, depending upon what your portfolio looks like. So all of a sudden, you have a larger asset base, but you also have a passive income coming in that is paying you, even though you're holding $2-3 million worth of debt. Right now as well, we have high interest rates in comparison to what they were a couple of years ago. And we were expecting rates to have dropped a little bit by now, but inflation's kind of sticking around a little bit. But what is going to kind of take place in a landscape of about 18 months is we're probably going to see some rate decreases. So if we couple that with one, rental income increasing year on year, but then rates are going to drop a little bit as well, our cash flow is then fluctuating and it's actually increasing because our repayments are reducing because of those rates, which just opens up that passive income as well. And that's something as an investor, if we're investing for 10, 15, 20 years, we have to understand that our cash flow, even though rental income increases over time, the cash flow is always going to fluctuate a little bit because we're holding debt and we're reliant on the RBA and what that cash rate is, because that's going to influence the rates we get from lenders. So 2 to 3 years ago, rates were awesome and we were purchasing positive cash flow property all the time. But now we've went through that rate rising cycle and cash flow isn't as good as what it was 3 years ago. But swings and roundabouts, it will come and go, it'll ebb and flow. And that's something you have to understand and incorporate into your mindset. So 15 years time, that rental income growth has increased substantially. Rates, depending where they are at that point in time, that passive income is increasing. The debt that we're holding, the dollar value has stayed the same, as assuming an interest only repayment scenario, but that dollar value is worth less than it was today. Now, if you're very financially disciplined, and most likely you are if you're building one, two, three, four, five, six, however many investment properties, you're now getting passive income from those properties, paying you in the pocket. And this is what people also don't understand is you can then make a choice that potentially you might love your job and you might continue to work, but you've got this passive income of 50, 60 grand or whatever it looks like in that 10, 15 year period. You can start to inject that surplus cash back in to start paying down the debt on that portfolio over time as you get to that passive income. So you don't have to hold, if you don't want to, the portfolio in interest only all the time. You might, if you've got 5 properties, you might just flip one of those properties and the debt to principal and interest, keep your repayments low on everything else, and then you're just starting to focus on paying down one debt at a time. Reduces your cash flow, but you've got those positives of paying debt down. But I like to stay interest only all the time, no matter where I'm at in my portfolio. Reason being is that we just have to remember that property performance, property prices going up in value, our loan to valuation ratio, the LVR, actually drops over time, even though that dollar amount is staying the same from a debt point of view. Because if we have 3 mil worth of property today, we've got a debt of, let's say, 1.5 mil. In 15 years' time, we're still holding that debt of 1.5, but the property value is now 6 mil. So our loan to valuation ratio has significantly dropped, even though we haven't paid a dollar of that off. Remembering again that inflation devalues that debt as well, but our asset base is now far larger because we've let time do our thing. And that's just not paying debt off at all. So don't get focused on having to pay debt off. I'm a big believer that you leave it as interest only, you're reducing your commitments on those repayments, increasing that passive income, and it just gives you options, right? You might just build that up in an offset account, but you still have access to those funds when you want to dip into those. You don't have repercussions from the ATO on justifying how you spend those funds if you're withdrawing it from a security or from a loan, because it's in your offset account, still offsetting the balance of the loan. However, you can spend those funds as you choose to. So this is where it's just really powerful to focus on financially free, not debt free. It's not scary to get into debt if you understand these things that I've discussed today. It's just a matter of going out there, leveraging the largest asset base, being patient, being financially disciplined, and letting time do its thing. Because in 10, 15, 20 years' time, it's going to serve you extremely well. Your debt's going to be devalued due to inflation. Your rental income's going to increase over time and create that larger passive income that if you want to, you can go and inject back into paying some of that debt down. Or you're living off passive income, you might be able to go and travel more every single year. Or you might have that option now where you don't have to work 5 days a week. You might only work 3 days a week, 4 days a week, have a larger weekend, have more balance, and just enjoy what you do when you go and go to work those couple of days. On the flip side, trying to pay down that owner-occupied property, slaving away, working really hard to pay that debt down, and then still relying on the pension into retirement. Financially free, being in debt gives you far more options, and it's just a matter of going out there and working smarter, not harder, okay? Don't get me wrong. Being debt-free is wonderful, but there are far better options to create financial freedom in your future if you just understand that getting into good debt is a good thing, right? Getting those high-performing assets that are going to substantially improve your asset base, your wealth base over time. And this isn't really getting into today, even getting the property purchases right. It's really just comparing the two options, understanding that taking action, purchasing those properties is going to serve you really well. Once you then go out there and really smash the purchases out of the property, which we've gone over in episodes in the past, that's where you're getting performance that's above that 5% average per year for a property to double in value every 15 years. If you can do that, you're going to speed that process up exponentially. A lot of the properties that we've purchased in the last couple of years have done 30, 40%. So just significantly above the national average, significantly above that just really average conservative figure that we use for projections of 5% each year. Even if you can double that to 10% a year, which is super realistic, it's going to serve you really well. You're going to get that performance and you're going to build up that wealth base a lot quicker. The earlier you get in, the earlier you start, the more beneficial it's going to be. But if you're out there and you are a little bit older than in your 20s and 30s, don't think it's too late, because if you go out there and you can let 10 to 15 years work for you, and you go out there, you use a professional, you're getting those high performing properties, you're getting it right, you can still go out there and create a more fruitful future for yourself. All right. That's it for today, guys. I've waffled on, very passionate about this and really just changing your mindset about debt-free versus financially free, because we are conditioned to focus on being debt-free because it fits in with society. But if you can go out there, become financially free, hold more debt, it's going to serve you extremely well. Hope you've enjoyed this one. As always, any questions, any feedback, something you want to see on an episode, let us know and we'll make sure we get to it in a future episode. Thanks for listening. As always, have a wonderful week. Go out there, smash your goals, and we'll see you next time. Bye. Thank you for listening to this episode of the podcast. If you don't already, make sure you follow us across all of our social platforms. That can be Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook. I wish you all the best out there on your property investing journey, and I hope each decision you make in purchasing more property gets you closer to your goal of financial freedom.